Hari Om. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurme Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Kapura Gauram Karunavtaram Sansara Saram Bhujagendraharam Sada Vasantam Hridayaravinде Bhavam Bhavani Sahitam Namami Bhavam Bhavani Sahitam Namami. Hari Om. We seek the blessings of the divine gods, Adi Guru, Apujya Gurus, and Guru Parampara. Team Param Vedanta welcomes you all. Namaste. This is the 8th session of Panchadashi Chapter 7, Tripti Dipa. We continue to reflect on the Mahavakyas. Yes, let us take time to fully imbibe. When the Guru is telling us, aham Brahma Asmi, a lot of doubts come up. And Swami Vidyaranya expertly resolves every one of the doubts. He then takes up the topic of how exactly self-realization takes place and why the hesitation to abide in this truth, the obstacles in the process. We will learn all this today. But first, we begin today's session with a recap of last week's session by Dr. Kiran. Over to you, Dr. Kiran.
Hari Om, Namaste, Guru Bhyo Namah. Tripti Dipa, the light of enlightenment, the more it is shared, the more it grows and shines brighter. This beautiful chapter of the Panchadashi, we are studying 7th chapter. This is essentially an explanation of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this verse. Atmanam ched vijanayat. If a man knows self as I am this, that is, I am Asmi iti Purushaha, then what we will have desires and attachment, and for what we will be worrying or thinking about this body in the wake of this body. Let us recollect what we have studied last week, which was essentially the explanation of the 10th man and Mahavakya. Essentially, there is two types of knowledge. One is Paroksha Gnana, that is indirect, and Aparoksha Gnana. This is there to know the avarana which we have covered and to get rid of it, how to do it. One is Sattva avarana. We know that Atma, we are not even aware that Atma is there, but the Atma is running through us. This is Sattva avarana, and this is got rid of by knowledge. Next is Bhana avarana, that is, we know that Atma is there, I am Atma, but I'm not able to get that feeling. This worry doesn't go at all. How this is got rid of? Swami says this is also got rid of by knowledge itself, not by any experience. You don't get anything. Next slide, please. We were studying how to find this 10th man, the Dashamaha. The Guru asks you to count all the 9 and then ultimately shows that you are the 10th, Tattvam Asi. And first, what was indirect knowledge when he counts and then himself, this becomes the direct knowledge. Hence, only by Shravana and by understanding, this ignorance is gone. You should know the 9 men first, that is, you should know the Jagat, then you will know yourself also. 10th man is the experiencer and the experiencing. Next slide, please. The 10th man counts the other 9, but he forgets to count himself. It is not that he says Ram is missing or Sham is missing. It is always he who is missing. So in all this world, we get caught in this world, ephemeral world, but we forget to know, see, understand the one thing or one person, one Purushaha, which is running through the world and also me. So essentially, when you are searching in the world, you are looking at the reflection of you only, like this narcissist. in God, whether it is Shama, Rama, Shama, or Shiva, you are searching for yourself alone. You alone are reflected in everything. So, knowing you, you know everything. Next slide. Then, how to know this? The way which is prescribed is in Shastras by under the Guru, knowing the Mahavakya and then understanding and contemplating on it. One of the thing is, he says, Tattamasya, the Tattvamasi Vakyas. That is, first you understand the Mahavakya and then contemplate it. Here, Sadeva Ekameva means that becomes indirect. Ekameva Advitiyam is indirect knowledge. There is one non-dual self. That is indirect knowledge. Oh, it may be there somewhere. Then once I understand that is me, that becomes aparoksha. Next slide, please. And what is this aparoksha? What is this contemplation? It is not some new experience which we gain. After knowing this knowledge and contemplating on it and getting rid of all the impurities or balam, we really know the real self, the truth. This is the aparoksha jnana. Just like how when we learn bicycle, there is no new experience which comes and say, I have some hell around it, that the bicycle knowledge. No, but we know that we know the bicycle knowledge. Similarly, when we know the Atma as I know it, there's no need to have any experience of it. Next slide, please. This is explained again and again in many Mahavakyas. First, he takes up Chandogya Upanishad. As I told you, first he says, Sadeva Somya Idamagra Asit Ekameva Advitiyam. That means there is one Ekam which is Advitiyam, non-dual. This is an indirect knowledge. Okay, I do a scholarly knowledge of it. Then he says, what is that? That is you. Tattvamasi iti. Once we know that, then this is converted into direct knowledge or aparoksha jnana. It is again explained in Taittiriya Upanishad beautifully, what is called as Varuna Vidya. Here he gives first preamble, Yata Yoni Bhutani. That means in which everything is arises and everything resolves, and one which that is unchanging self, that is the Satyam. He gives the first preamble, and then he explains. First he asks, okay, Annam Brahma, go and contemplate. Then he goes on contemplating on it. This is one way of. Next slide, please. Once we can contemplate the 5 elements, that is earth, water, more settled fire, air, space, and again in me, this body, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. Ultimately, 5 Panchabhutas and 5 Panchakoshas. You remove this 10th, what you remains is the 10th man, that is you. That is the real essence, you. Next slide. Then one more beautiful verse, it is given in Taittiriya, that is Swarup, what is called as Satyam Jnanam Anantam. This is called as Swarupa Lakshana. This we have to understand. That means if you want to describe Atma or Brahman without any examples, and what is this means, it is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. All 3 together describes the essential nature of Brahman. You cannot remove any one word of it and which can explain Brahman. No, all together. If you say sugar sweet, that means every sweet thing is example of sugar in it, and every sugar will have sweetness in it. You can't say how is sweet means you don't say sweet is like not salt. No, that is not. Similarly, Swarupa Lakshana means Satyam Jnanam Anantam. This is the Brahma Swarupa Lakshana. Then let us go back to our Tattvamasi. What we have to take? Should we take primary meaning or the Lakshartha secondary meaning? The primary meaning means, as we see verbatim. So if he says Tattvamasi means I am high Brahman, this 5 feet 11 inches, this person, can I be Ishvara or Brahman? No, it is not possible. So we have to take the Lakshartha. So me, the real me is covered by something else which is not making me realize this. These are the malams which we remove it by karma yoga and upasana yoga. Once it is done and then we contemplate on it, we get the real knowledge. Next slide, please. Next is a beautiful verse which talks about what are the different types of, when we refer to something, what are the different ways to which we say. One is like Bhaga or If I say a river is located, this house is located on the river, we know that the river house cannot be located on the river, it will be by the side of it. So we take a totally new meaning. This is one way of. Otherwise, Bhagatyaga Lakshana. That means I ate banana. Does it mean I eat with the peel? No, I remove the peel and I eat banana. Similarly, another example, beautiful example is given is Soyam Devadatta. Oh, that Devadatta is the same person. His long lost friend Devadatta, who he has lost, he has not seen since many years, he has found now. So he says that Devadatta, who was young, handsome, and looking like Tom Cruise, now is old. He doesn't resemble anything of what he has seen before. But still, he says this person is Devadatta. So in my childhood, I have seen a small baby now grown, but I've changed everything. But still, I don't say I'm a different person. I am this Devadatta. Next slide, please. And similarly, a doubt arises when I study this indirect knowledge. Will I get this, enlightenment after some time? As we see in many other schools of thought, okay, I'll go to heaven. No, this is not so. Once we get it, this thing happens here and now, because the person who is lost is you. The 10th man is you. The Tattvamasi is you. So once you find yourself, the happiness you get is here and now. There is nothing else. There is nowhere else happiness is found. So the 10th man thus knows the self as I am this. Remember the first verse I told you. And once I found this, there's nothing more to, so I won't go in search of 11th person. I'm happy and jumping with joy, I go. This is how it happens. Once I realize the true self as aparoksha jnana, this happiness is here and now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kiran, for giving us a recap of all the verses that we studied in the last class. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Grasaika Karmane Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purushaha Kimichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anusvam Jvaret. If you see the first line will be explained in about 130 verses, and we are reaching about the 100th verse in this class. So we are almost clear about the understanding of the first line. What is this meaning of this word? Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat. Dr. Kiran has just done a recap of so many verses in the last class. The important topic that we touched in the last class was what is called Mahavakya Vichara. If the Guru straight away tells you, you are that, you are Brahman, it does not make sense. Exact as in the 10th man example, the teacher took the trouble of asking him to count each one of them. And then through a process, this is what is called Mahavakya Vichara. And this Mahavakya Vichara is the climax of any Vedantic teaching. And in today's class, we conclude this Mahavakya Vichara, which means we are coming to the climax of the Tripti Dipa. Two things to remember, that there are two kinds of words in our scriptures. We call them Avantara Vakya and Mahavakya. I will give you them in English. These are called words of information. Now, if I want to describe Brahman as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, which we call Avantara Vakya. Now, I want to know about God. I want to know about Brahman. So the scriptures give you a lot of information about that limitless, all-pervading consciousness as Brahman. So the first set of words we get are some great description of that Brahman. Later on, through this process of Mahavakya Vichara, the teacher now becomes confident of telling the student, all that I spoke to you, that information I gave you, is none about your true nature. It is Tattvam Asi. Now, how does the teacher does this process? The teacher has to do just like Dr. Kiran gave that banana example, Bhaga Tyaga. That means when I consume a fruit, I consume some part of it, I reject some part of it. Now, if you have to get this aham Brahma Asmi iti jnanam, there are few things that we have to do. If you don't do that, Brahma Vidya becomes only theoretical. The first process, which will be emphasized in all the teachers in today's class, will be talking about what is this neti neti. There is a process of negation. You have in that famous Nirvana Shatakam, Mano Buddhi Hankara Chittani Naham. These are called, Brahman is introduced by saying what Brahman is not, neti neti. So when you say Jagan Mithya, that means this body of mine and this world around, my family, my possessions, my friends, everything is of a lower order of reality. Then who is the reality? There is something in me that is real, and that the teacher tries to introduce as Brahma Satyam. And finally, the teacher develops all the confidence to say, there is something limitless, always there. What is that is always there in you? And that is Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. In a text like this, which is an advanced text, there is a method of checking whether you have understood what the teacher is saying. So the teacher introduces a person called a Purva Pakshi. A Purva Pakshi is a person who will take an opposing point of view and literally attack the teacher and say, you have given a phrase which you call it as Siddhanta, I'm not able to accept it. Now, for example, when Kiran concluded in the last class, there was a Purva Pakshi statement. No statement can give aparoksha jnanam. They can only give paroksha jnanam. And in today's class, Dr. Ravi Shankar will be saying about that. And if you believe so, there will be very ridiculous consequences. Dr. Ravi Shankar will also touch upon this entity. Now, normally Brahman, you say, does not have an upadhi. And the Purva Pakshi needles you. How can you know anything that does not have an upadhi? Now, so the teacher will tell us, can Brahman have an upadhi? And toward the end of the class, you will have another very pertinent question, because at some stage you will realize it is when I am with my mind, that means when I wake up and my mind wakes up, I become a limited individual. When I am fast asleep, I am Sadashiva, I am Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. That means when I am fast asleep, when my Antakaranam Rahitya, when it is not there, I am one with Brahman. Now, when I wake up and I negate my mind, when my mind is not there, how can I say aham Brahmasmi when that aham is not there? All these questions will be answered in class today. As I said, we are reaching the climax, and when we reach the climax, the difficulties also become more. There is one topic which will be addressed in our class today, and I want you to be very attentive to use these two terms. Don't give too much importance to the literal meaning of these terms. What is this vritti vyapti and pala vyapti? Now, if you have heard Swamiji's talks many times, and when you listen to our teachers presenting what is vritti vyapti and pala vyapti, it will make sense. If not, it will cause a lot of confusion. And if there is confusion in your mind, take it from me, you are thinking. Only a thinking mind will be confused. So I'm not going to speak about what is vritti vyapti or what is pala vyapti, but I will tell you how one way you can understand it. There is one wonderful method by which Swami Paramarthananda has been giving us this teaching for a long time. And that he gives you by showing you his hand. And he says, you are seeing my hand. Is there something other than my hand which you are able to see? And then there is a pause and you begin to say, what is there other than the hand? But those who have been in this class for a long time will say, there is something other than the hand which I am also seeing, that is the light upon my hand. Now let us now look at all the objects in the room around you. Now, even if you're outdoors, you will see there are so many objects that you can see. One thing is certain, I can see all of them because there is light on them. If they were not illumined by light, if they were not enlightened objects, if I can use that word, I will never be able to see them. Now the teacher slowly takes you from the object to the subject. I'm able to see all those objects in front of me because there is light on them, and that light falls into my eyes. I'm able to see because of my eyes. The teacher has brought you closer to you, to your eyes. My eyes are able to see because of my mind. My mind is able to see. My mind is inert by itself, but my mind is pervaded by consciousness, which is called the reflected consciousness or Chidabhasa. Now I'm able to see all these objects because of light on the object, because of my eyes, because of my mind, because of my Chidabhasa. And my Chidabhasa or the reflected consciousness is there because there is the original consciousness. And this is what every Upanishad tries to tell us, Pratibodha Viditam Matam. In today's class, we will see how knowledge happens. How do I get to see? When I see an object outside, it becomes an image in my eye. From my image, it goes into my mind, and in my mind, it becomes a thought. Now, in today's class, the challenge is, I see so many objects. I can see a computer, I'll see a mobile telephone, I will see so many clothes around here. I see various objects. Now, what is the difference between this objective knowledge and the subjective knowledge? When the teacher tells you, aham Brahma Asmi, is this the same? And this is the fine, a fine discussion between what is called vritti vyapti and phala vyapti. I will not give too much importance, but if by some reason you are able to understand that, your understanding becomes very deep, because it is like this. Remember this Bhagavad Gita verse in the 15th chapter, na tad bhasayate surya na shashanko na pavakaha. But I would emphasize on the last line, yat gatva na nivartante tad dhamma paramam mama. Once you reach that abode, that means once you reach that level of understanding, that consciousness in me, because of which I'm able to experience everything, that the teacher has told is Tatvam Asi, and I say it as aham Brahma Asmi. Every time we do the arati, there is this mantra, na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam. But remember the third line, Tvameva bantam anubhati sarvam. Because of that light in consciousness in me, everything around is illumined. A similar thought comes in this verse, which Swamiji has used to explain how we get this knowledge in the Dakshinamurti Stotra. Before I know anything, Janami iti tameva bantam. That means before I know any object outside, I know myself. I know this is a computer, and I know this computer is not me. Similarly, when I know myself, there is no gap between me and this thought of aham Brahmasmi. And this is what the teacher will try to break his head to say, what is Akhanda Akara Vritti. Our opening speaker is Dr. Ravi Shankar. Dr. Ravi Shankar, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. In the 80th verse, Vachaspati Mishra says that the Mahavakya gives only paroksha or indirect knowledge. And Nirvikalpa Samadhi, only meditation alone, gives the aparoksha or direct knowledge. And this is refuted by Swami Vidyaranya, who gives the examples of Kailas Mansarovar or the Swarga as given by Nachiketa, to say that indirect knowledge is only an anumana, and says in one phrase, Dashame Vyabhicharata, to say that the 10th man example is an exception. There is an exception to every rule. And the exception is the moment you say you are the 10th man, aparoksha jnana, direct knowledge, is an instant knowledge, like the Mahavakya. In the next 81st verse, Swato paroksha jnanasya brahmatvam abhivanchata nashyet siddha parokshatvam iti yuktir mahatyayo. The understanding would be, for me, for one whose knowledge is self-evident and one who desires infinitude or brahmatvam, as we see in the next slide, argument that he may lose his existing direct experience is a real wonder. Swami Vidyaranya explains this, that here is a jiva, and he goes with his aparoksha knowledge to a Gurukul for Mahavakya Vichara to get his infinitude Brahmatva. As he goes there, he gets Paroksha Jnana of Jiva Paramatma Aikyam. So at the end of extensive Shravanam, he has Jivatma Paramatma understanding, which also becomes Paroksha. So Aikya becomes Paroksha, which means he has now gained Parokshatva. But there is the Nasha, he has lost the Aparokshatva, and therefore he doesn't get the Brahmatvam also. So one must continue to have enough of Shravanam of the Vakya Vichara to get Aparoksha Jnana. The 82nd verse in the next slide, Vriddhim istavato moolam api nashtam iti drisham Laukikam vachanam sartham sampannam tvat prasadataha. Swami Vidyaranya ji sarcastically tells this Purva Pakshi and says, this is going to be a lovely example for the Laukika Jivana. In the next slide, we see that investment which is done to gain capital with interest becomes a bad investment when there is loss of both capital and interest. Exactly the same way, the Shishya who went for Aparokshatva to get Brahmatvam further has now lost both of them. So this interpretation is a wonderful Laukika proverb, is what Swami Vidyaranya says. Gaudaparacharya further explains and says that strange is a man, he forgets and fears that investment in the most important thing, the untrodden path, he fears that. And he says that fearless truth is forgotten, and he feels his security of the samsara as the security itself. Swami Vidyaranya further explains that nechanapi muchyate, that's in the 20th verse, he says that infinitude, even if you don't want it, once you take the plunge, like the river goes into the ocean, there is only to gain the highest, nothing to be lost. In the next slide, which is the 83rd verse, Antakarana sambhinna bodha jivo parokshatvam arhatyupadi sadbhavan natu brahmanupadatitaha. This is a Pura Pakshi verse. Now he says in the next slide, as we see, that Brahman is of the nature of consciousness and is available as a paroksha I, or the intimate self-evident I am. And this consciousness, which is encased in the mind, using the antakarana as a medium or a upadhi, is available as a paroksha anubhava. Now this Brahman is actually upadhi rahita nirupadika, and hence itself is not available for aparoksha jnana. So therefore, jiva aparoksha jnana is due to the mind which acts as a upadhi. Now Paramatma, being free of upadhi, does not deserve this status of aparokshatva, is what the Purva Pakshi says, and therefore the Purva Pakshi says you cannot get Brahman aparoksha anubhava despite your aparoksha jnana, which means you can have jiva aparoksha jnana, but you can never have the Brahman aparoksha jnana, is what the Purva Pakshi says. In the 84th verse, naivam brahmatva bodhyasya sopadhi vishayatvata yavad videha kaivalyam upadher anivaranat. Swami Vidyaranya explains the previous verse and gives an answer and says, as we see in the next slide, Brahman does not have any upadhi, it's true. But in the Paramarthika Drishti, upadhi abhava is an upadhi itself, like an empty glass which stands out from the full glasses, and like a bald head stands out of the other people who have much of hair. So Paramarthika Drishti, there is no Nirguna, no Saguna, no Jnani, no knower and no known. However, in the Vyavaharika Avastha, it is the presence of this Upadhi, which is called as Sopadika. And because of this Sopadhi is this Prakriya of Neti, where the Sharira Traya Abhava is done to understand the Upadhi for Brahma Jnana in the Vyavaharika Avastha. The other Upadhi, which is in Vyavahara, is the absence of Upadhi, which is Nirupadhika. Swami Vidyaranya explains that Nirguna, which is the absence of gunas, itself becomes an Upadhi. In short, minded consciousness is Jiva and a mindless consciousness is Brahman. So I know Brahman as aparokshatasya, I, the mindless consciousness, which is Brahman. As we move on, in the next slide, we see the 85th verse, which is Antakarana Sahitya Rahitya Bhasyam Vishishyate Upadhi Jiva Bhavasya Brahmatayasya Nanyata. The explanation would be like this. Brahman has a conditioning. We see in the next word in the slide. The absence of all the shariras and prapancha is that conditioning. Like we say, the barren land, and it qualifies the absence of vegetation. In the same way, liberating Brahma Jnana is knowledge of Brahman, which has the absence of all adjectives. Turiya is this, therefore, Nishprapancha Brahma. And Aparoksha Jnana is possible by excluding the mind. And therefore, I have two status. With the mind, I am a Jiva, and without the mind, I am Brahman. Right? In the next slide, we would therefore understand that in the absolute Paramarthika plane, there is no presence or absence. But in the Vyavaharika plane, the presence or absence of an Upadhi, for example, the Antakarana Rahita Chaitanya is Brahman, Antakarana Sahita Chaitanya is Jivatma, Nishprapancha Brahman is Turiya, absence of mind with Brahman is Chaitanya Brahman, and presence of mind with Brahman is Jiva Bhavasya Upadhi, which is Chaitanya Jivatma. In the next slide, these words of Nirupadhika and Sopadhika has been explained in this form. We would not keep this as a part of the final recording probably. The subjective error, which is an error in my perception because of inadequate information, is Nirupadhika, which is because of the avidya of Jiva. For example, the snake rope or the shell in the silver in the shell examples. And this Swarupa Adhyasa completely gets corrected when you have adequate information or evidence. But the objective error, which is the Sopadhika, is caused by Maya of Ishvara, like the mirage, like the sunset and sunrise, like the red flower showing in a crystal, which is an erroneous perception for everybody. And even though you have the right knowledge, this perception persists, and that is Sopadhika. In the next slide, we would understand that the two words Abhasa, Chidabhasa, for example, and Adhyasa, there is a small difference. Abhasa is the reflection, it is a false phenomenon, and Jiva is the Abhasa of Brahman through the medium of our mind. Adhyasa or Adhyaropa is the superimposition, like in the silver in the nakhar or the snake on the rope example, which is because of Ajnana Avidya. It disappears with right knowledge, and like has been explained, the real nature of Brahman, once understood, the body-mind identification completely disappears. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shankar, for giving us a detailed explanation. Now Vidyaranya brings in the Purva Pakshi to find out what is real about us and what is unreal about us, and then about what is an Upadhi. Upadhi is a means by which we are able to communicate, we are able to express. Now, if Brahman does not have any upadhis, how are you able to teach about Brahman? And this last verse is an important verse. The only distinction between Brahman, which we all want to realize and experience, is Brahman is free of all upadhis. The moment I wake up, I become enveloped with this upadhi, and therefore I have a feeling of limitations. Watch a person when he or she is fast asleep. That person, when the mind is not there, the person is not apart from Brahman. The moment a person wakes up, the upadhi comes into being. And when the Parabrahma, Paramatma manifests through this limitation, you experience all forms of limitations. What do we need to do through Brahma Vidya? Understand the mind as only an instrument and see yourself as you are. Now, I will stop here and I will leave this for a few minutes for discussions. Anybody can ask Dr. Ravi Shankar any questions on.
Hari Om, sir. In the Shloka 84, while explaining, doctor said it is Paramarthika Drushtya, there is no Nirguna or Saguna. How Paramarthika Drushtya itself is Nirguna Brahman's reference, is it not?
The absence of upadhi is being highlighted here, Rama madam. So, though it is nirguna, it is not an upadhi. It is absence of the three gunas. So, since Brahman has no gunas, here the highlight is being is the absence of the gunas that is being shown as an upadhi. So, this is the method of explaining the upadhi and neti of the nirguna also to explain Brahman. Probably that is what is the explanation here.
That is true. Very clearly brought out that even if there is no gunas, there is no upadhi, that itself helps us to discover Brahma Vidya. We will proceed to the next speaker, and that is Dr. Sachin. Dr. Sachin, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So the last two verses, which already has been explained, and the following three more verses will explain about Sopadika Brahman Upadhi. So even though Brahman is limitless and has no attributes, but to understand Brahman in our Vyavaharika Jagat, we need to have some upadhis or way to explain Brahman. So in the next slide, we see the 87th verse. Atadvyavrutti rupena sakshadviti mukhena cha vedantanam pravrutti syad dvidetyacharya bhashitam. So we see this verse is Vidyaranya's answer to Purva Pakshi's question from the 86th verse, that how can an absence of thing be a upadhi? He says upadhi is given to identify just the nama and rupa of an object. And if the absence of upadhi helps us to identify Brahman, then why not use this negative upadhi? Abhava or absence can also serve as upadhi in understanding Brahman in Vyavaharika plane. And he further explains by giving some examples, like in this slide, we see empty brass vessels. One of them is empty, other are all filled. So just by tapping each and getting that negative or sound of absence of liquid, we find that particular vessel which is empty. And in the same way, we use the absence of upadhi for identifying Brahman, which is attributeless. Only the Vyavaharika plane, the samsara is full of attributes. The Jagat is mithya, but Brahman is satyam. He is attributeless. We go to the next slide. See, we have Mahavakyas to know, and there are many such Mahavakyas, both positive or negative, means with presence and absence of upadhis. So Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahman is a positive way of understanding Brahman. In similar lines, in Mundaka Upanishad, na anta pragnyam, na vaishya pragnyam, which is actually a neti, a principle which is used to negate everything until Brahman is revealed. Next slide, sir. The correct question would be actually, when shall I claim myself as Brahman? So when I exclude myself from the mind, which in last verses also as explained, when I exclude myself from mind, then I claim that I am the Brahma Tattvam. The Brahma Tattvam in me is very clear to everyone. Here, abhava is necessary to claim myself or the real self, as it is limitless. Still, even in the limitlessness, we use the word limit. Again, a absence or a negative upadhi. So, understanding the Anantam, we still are using the limited entity here. But what we have to understand that, sir, just tap, sir, next. Yeah, coming to the proper Mahavakyas, Atat Avrutta Rupena. Here, Vyavrutta means negation of attributes, which is given as Brahma Pramanam in the first line of 87th shloka, which we chanted right now. In the second line, Vyakyavritti Vakya of none other than Adi Shankaracharya, in many scriptures are already given this, like in Vivek Vidhi Mukhencha, that is means from the scriptures this is taken. So first line is telling Brahma Pramana. The second part of this line is telling that Brahman can be described positively as Sat and Chit, negatively as Prapancha Upashamam. Have not got this Prapanchaha, that the world is not there for Brahman. Now, again, Purva Pakshi comes with another question in next slide. That is, when aham is excluded from aham Brahmasmi, then how can one claim Brahma? So Vidyaranya Swami divides this aham into three components. He says aham actually is made up of mind, the chidabhasa, the mind, then the chidabhasa and the chit. So one is the RC, the mind is the RM, reflective medium, and finally the OC, the chit. By excluding aham, we only exclude the first two, mind and chidabhasa. So that is, by here we claim the chit by bhaga. First the three components, and then tyaga, removal of the two, chidabhasa and mind principle. So the example of Brahman as substratum, as we see in this small photo, we can see that the roots alone is Brahman, the substratum. Rest, the trunk, branches, leaves, fruits and flowers are all prapancha alone. So we move on to the next verse, and that is Antakaranasanthyagad Vashishte Chidatmani Aham Brahmeti Vakyena Brahmatvam Sakshi Nikshate. So what is left behind is Chidatma, Sakshini or Sakshi. In the Brahman status is recognized, which is limitless, and the limitation belong to mind and the Chidabhasa alone. RM and RC both are limited. Original consciousness is limitless. How does the student claim that? Aham Brahma iti Vakyanam. Aham Brahma Asmi. That is how he claims. In the next slide, we see the example of a sunlight reflected on a surface. So consider sunlight as original consciousness and the mirror as reflective medium, and the space which is lighted is reflective consciousness. And once we remove the mirror or the reflective medium, the reflective consciousness also is gone. So the two components are gone, but what remains is original consciousness. In the last slide, we see that how do we exclude this mind, which is very difficult? Is it possible by physically or mentally, by keeping on samadhi? No. With my understanding, I remove the mind. With the help of Shastra, with the Guru's help, by sheer understanding that I am the Paramatma, I am the Paramarthika Satyam, higher order of understanding, and mind is the lower order. And so I become mindless. Mithya mind's presence or absence doesn't make any difference to me. me means the higher me. By removing the mind by Tyaga and Mityatva, mind is removed from the original consciousness. Thus, I claim Brahmatvam in Satya Chaitanyam through the statement Aham Brahma Asmi. Hari Om. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sachin. That was a great work. You had very difficult verses which you have been able to explain in a very, very simple manner.
Thank
The
you.
first of your two verses, if I have to say, Vidyaranya Swami, now he's coming to the climax of the Mahavakya Vichara. He says Brahman can be seen in two ways, as something existent like Sat and Chit, and Prapanchopashamam, something that is absent. So there are two ways to be able to describe Brahman. As we saw in that original explanation, Mano Buddhi Hankara Chittani Naham. So there is a negation, this is what I am not. Then what am I? Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Then we have another verse which we just explained. Now, Antakarana Tyagad. If I give up my Antakarana. Antakarana means my mind. Now, when you give up your mind, how can you say I? When you cannot say I, this is the Purva Pakshi's question. So when you have given up your mind, how can you say Aham Brahmasmi? So very nicely, Sachin gave us a nice picture here. Now, when you say who you are, in all of us, there are three things. The original consciousness is always there because it is always pervading. Now, I have a mind. The mind has the ability to reflect the original consciousness. And when the original consciousness, Brahman, comes on my mind, a new entity is born, which is my ego. That means when I wake up, a Chidabhasa, a reflected consciousness, a false individual is born because of that upadhi of my mind. But now because of that teacher who came, remember the 10th man story, all of us were in distress. And the teacher says it's Brahman Asti. Oh, we are all very happy. Then the teacher will try to tell you, see, now you do Bhaga Tyaga. Can you mentally separate your mind? Your mind has helped you to understand yourself, but mentally see your mind only as an instrument. You take it off. You take away the reflected consciousness. What is left is the original consciousness. Now, questions for Dr. Sachin, open for discussion, please.
So these are very technical, but for the intellectuals, this is, if they want to go through these verses, it'll be good, because then they know that how does this thought process, how do we come to this conclusion that Aham Brahmasmi, and how does the Shabd becomes into a thought, and the thought with, the Vakya Vikriti and the RC doesn't need to make that evident, because Brahman is self-evident.
Yes, Nita, we are in the path of Jnana Yoga. In Jnana Yoga, we need knowledge of all these intricacies. Otherwise, the student will say, how can you say Aham Brahmasmi? Isn't that idiotic? How can you be God? So therefore, Swami Tadatmananda has given an example of a microbiologist who wants to see the microbe, but is learning about the instrument through which you get to see about the microscope. Then you get to know the whole knowledge process. And that is a lot of work has been done in our Shastras. How do I get to know this world? How do I get to know Brahma Asmi? We will come to the next speaker. And I know it is going to be difficult. Apeksha, please.
Hari Om, sir. So we'll go to the verse number 7.91 and 7.92. But before we go to the verse, I have included certain slides which will make it very, very easy for us to understand the meaning of those two verses. And thanks to Swami Paramarthananda, these two verses were made very, very simple. So first of all, as all of us know, that every knowledge, we all accept that every knowledge takes place in the mind. And second, that knowledge which is generated or can only be created when you apply the 6 pramanas that we have read earlier. But some people, they have said, why can't intuition be one of those pramanas? Because intuition, so some people say through intuition also you can gain knowledge. But here it is said intuition can be sometimes wrong also and sometimes right also. So it is not 100% accurate. That's why intuition is never considered as one of the pramanas through which knowledge can be created or generated in our mind. Now, so Swamiji here says that, knowledge can only be learned in tuition, and there's a gap, and then tuition. So when you go through a teacher, then only knowledge can be generated. Knowledge always takes place in the form of thought. So this is very clear, any knowledge, be it material or spiritual, any knowledge, it is in the form of a thought. For example, the pot knowledge that we are going to talk about, or any cricket score, match is going on, cricket score, it only, it is always in the form of thought. We take the knowledge. Next slide, sir. But what is very important to know here is that every thought that comes in our mind is not knowledge, but every knowledge is in the form of a thought. And this knowledge part is called as vritti jnana in these shlokas, vritti jnana. So this terminology is every knowledge is vritti jnana. And as we all know already, that mind is always pervaded by the reflected consciousness or chidabhasa, active or in sushupti state. Even while we are sleeping, chidabhasa is always there in the mind, right? So next slide, sir. So when we know that mind is always pervaded by the chidabhasa, every knowledge is in the form of a thought, and thought is in the mind. Mind is a modification of thought only. So we can say that all thoughts are pervaded by chidabhasa. Right. So vritti jnana, or the knowledge, always has two components to it. One is the reflected medium, that is the thought. And the second is the reflected consciousness, that is chidabhasa. So knowledge is nothing but relevant thought, the right thought, plus reflected consciousness or chidabhasa that we are going to talk about. And for example, the pot knowledge that we are going to read in detail, because the shlok number 91 is all about pot knowledge. Pot knowledge is the pot thought, the thought about that pot, plus the reflected consciousness. Next slide, sir. But interestingly, we know that every knowledge has two components, right? We have seen vritti jnana is like thought plus reflected consciousness. But Brahma jnana also has two components, but only one component plays a major role there. That is vritti amsa and chidabhasa amsa. These are the two components everywhere. It is included for Brahma jnana also. But in case of Brahma jnana, the special thing is only the thought part, that is the vritti amsa part, has a function, and we will look into it through an example, very beautiful example given by Swami Vidyaranya ahead, that how this is possible. Only thought part has a function, whereas chidabhasa does not play any role to it. So in Brahma jnana, only chidabhasa will have not play any role, and in any other knowledge that you see, it will always, chidabhasa always has a role because it lights up the thought that is in the mind. Next slide, sir. So yes, let's look at the 7.91 shlok in detail, pot knowledge. So for example, this is an image of a pot that we are seeing, right? We are seeing. So to gain this pot knowledge, our Vedanta says that the mind goes as a beam of thought. The beam of thought goes on to that pot, like from a torch, a light will go, right? A beam will go. Just like that, the ray comes out from vritti amsa and it pervades the pot. So this is called as vritti vyapti. Right, when our vritti, that is the thought, the ray comes, the thought is there and it pervades the pot, it is called as vritti vyapti. And when the vritti pervades, since every thought we know chidabhasa is also there, that is the reflected consciousness is also there, chidabhasa also pervades on this pot, that is called as chidabhasa vyapti. Next slide, sir. So with vritti vyapta, the thought removes the ajnana vritti in us and tells us that this is a pot. Whereas the reflected consciousness or the chidabhasa vyapti illumines and makes the pot known to us. That is how we come to know, okay, the ignorance is gone because of the vritti vyapti, and the object, this pot here, for example, is illuminated by the chidabhasa. So I gain that this is a pot. Next slide, sir. Whereas now we come to the 7.92 shlok, we'll see later, Brahma jnana. Whereas in Brahma Jnana, only the vritti or the thought is very important for removing the ignorance. Now the question will come why. We will see why. With a couple of beautiful examples ahead. The Chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness, need not illumine Brahman, because Brahman is the original consciousness. We have seen in the earlier verse also, right? Brahman is the original consciousness. So we see, next slide, sir. In this example, we'll understand why Brahman Chidabhasa cannot illumine the Brahman. So for example, in this you are seeing, right, the moon. The moon is the one which illumines the earth. We can see the earth and moon is illuminating the earth because earth in itself, it does not have any light. It is inert, right? So moon is there to illuminate the earth. But can we use the same moonlight to illuminate the sun, which is compared to Brahman here, right? It is not possible, and it is not needed also, because this very moonlight, the very Chidabhasa is there because of the original consciousness, or this moon is there because moonlight is there because of the original sunlight. So moonlight is redundant in case of sun illumination. That's why we say Chidabhasa, or the reflected consciousness, is redundant or has no role. It is not absent. It has no role to play in the case of Brahman illumination. So when we say aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, it means, the Chidabhasa is not required to illumine the original consciousness when we say. Next slide, sir. There's one more example. So in this room, you can see that, this person, like for example, if I'm reading a book, you need actually two factors to it. One, if I'm reading a book, you are looking at this person, you need your eye to look at it. And then there is light falling on the book. Like sir also gave the example of the hand, right? Similarly, this book is also one of those examples. So you need to see this book, you need two factors, your eye and the light that is coming. But to see the light, you use only your eyes, right? Only one factor is required. Similarly, it is compared to the anatma. The two factors are there, the thought and the Chidabhasa. But to know the Atma, the original consciousness, you need only one factor, that is the thought only. Next slide, sir. So Brahma Jnana, in that, what is mean? Atma is self-evident. We do require a thought which refers to Atma, like aham Brahmasmi. We do require this thought. The only difference is that it is not illumined by Chidabhasa here. So here, by the way of negation, all the Vedanta acharyas has negated the Chidabhasa and its function is negated. And therefore, the knowledge is established here. The Brahma Jnana, that aham Brahmasmi, only requires one factor, which is the vritti or the thought. Next slide, sir. So now we go to the shlokas. Here Vidyaranya Swami contrasts Brahma Jnana with Pot Jnana in the shloka number 91, which is Buddhi Tatastha Chidabhaso Dvavapi Vyapnato Ghatam Tatra Jnanam Dhya Nashya Da Abhasin Ghatas Furen. So here Vidyaranya Swami says that for this pot knowledge to happen, the thought of the mind goes out and pervades the pot. The ignorance, which is the avarna here, is eliminated by the thought that we have created, and it pervades the pot. And because of the Chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness, the pot is illumined. And because in itself, the pot is jada, the pot is inert, so it cannot be illumined. So that Chidabhasa was required to illumine the thought, and this is in the case of pot knowledge. But what happens in the case of Brahma Jnana? Next slide, sir. It says, Brahma Jnana Nashai Vritti Vyaptir Apekshataha Swayam Swaran Rupatvaha Anna Abhasaha Upyujyate. In the case of Brahman, the thought aham Brahmasmi is required to remove the ignorance or the Brahma Ajnana that we have. Chidabhasa is not utilized, like we gave the example of moonlight is not required here because Brahman is the original consciousness, the sun. Here, Brahman is not like a pot, right? So Chidabhasa is not utilized. Brahma is self-radiant, self-effulgent, and already self-evident. So you don't require the reflected consciousness to shine on the original consciousness. That's it. Hari Om, sir.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful, Apeksha. I do not know whose brilliance is it? Your brilliance, Swami Paramartha's?
Swami Paramarthananda's. And
or Vidyaranya
Paramarthananda's. Yeah.
See these verses, and Raksha will also have to conclude in the same verse, in the same thought of the vritti yapti and phala vyapti. Very good, you didn't go into those technical terms, but you explained that as simple as possible. And the fact that you understood it and you could, explain it in your own words with nice examples is proof that any one of us, and see, you are a busy person, mother of 2 children. Now, if you can do it, anyone can do it. But it means we have to work on it. We have to go through Swami Paramartha's audios, not once, twice. You can ask her at least 10 times, make notes to be able to understand. But what is the benefit? The benefit is tremendous. And, we get knowledge. How do we get knowledge? Every knowledge is through the medium of this instrument or the antakarana. When I see it comes into my mind. And there is some knower here in me. There are 3 levels of knowers. The original consciousness now has become the reflected consciousness. And in this reflected consciousness, an impression that I can see a wall and I can see a computer and so on. This is what is called objective knowledge. But when the teacher comes, the 10th man story comes and tells you through a certain process, now look, the one that you are looking for is none other than yourself. The teacher says, Tatit Tvam Asi. This knowledge is also like pot knowledge. It also comes into my mind. This is called vritti vyapti. So I need my antakarana, I need my instrument to get this Brahma Vidya, because until the teacher told me, I never knew I was that. The teacher had to give me these words of introduction. You are not this ordinary body-mind complex who's struggling for so many years. Within this body-mind, discover there's something of the extraordinary which has always been there and will always be there. Disidentify mano, buddhi, hankara, chittan and claim this. This is the end of your spiritual journey. Log on to this. Now you have got this knowledge. Now the rest is academic. I have got this knowledge like I've got this pot knowledge. But now to get any knowledge in my mind, there is this Chidabhasa or the reflected consciousness. But here, reflected consciousness is certainly there, but its role is redundant. Because now this is what is called Akhanda Akara Vritti. Now, this knowledge that I am, there is no gap. There is no separation whatsoever. So this is what our teacher is trying to pertain. I am very reluctant to open this for discussion, but I will still give 1 minute. Let me see, because there are only 2 things. Either you appreciate Apeksha, what she says, or go back and listen to Swami Paramarthananda. There are only 2 options now, but I'm still open for any discussion.
Sir, good evening. This is Anindita. Sir, yeah, Apeksha's explanation was actually very, very nice. I mean, she made it very clear, but I will go back to what Dr. Ravi Shankar was saying, because there I have got stuck. So mindless consciousness is Brahman. I mean, many of the things are following from there. So, sir, if you can explain that in a little more detail. And one more question, sir. I mean, it's not really related exactly to what we discussed today, but see, we are listening to this, but sir,
I'll interrupt you. I just want Dr. Ravi Shankar to answer this, so he will get some time to think over. But please tell me, what is your next question also?
Sir, like when you all were doing the Paramvedanta, the Bhagavad Gita classes, so you all also introduced PDF for the explanation of each of the verses that you all were giving. So will you be doing the same for this Panchadashi also, was one of my questions, because then there is a way that we can go back and keep reading or keep,
Sure. Absolutely. Now, right in the beginning, when I gave you the introduction, I told you where are the sources of our knowledge. And if you could, I do not know, even on this group, put your email ID. I will request Neeta to send you the PDF of all these talks. These talks will be available for you, because only when you listen to the audio, you have to get Swamiji's audios and then listen to it along with the notes. So these are the 2 ways we will be able to get this Brahma Vidya. Certainly, we will be able to transfer this information. And of course, both Swami Anubhavananda and Swami Tejomananda have given excellent books which are available in Amazon. You would go. Now I'll take you to the first question. I will ask Dr. Ravi Shankar to address what is this mindlessness. And I think even Sachin spoke about it, but I will ask Dr. Ravi Shankar to address it.
Thank you, sir. I'll try. Please suggest and add on, sir. So the mind is the upadhi. Mind is a reflecting media, and all the aspects of the mind are added on to the nirguna Brahma, which has no gunas. And that's how you see things in a jaundiced eye, so to say. The slide which Dr. Sachin showed makes a lot of sense. So if the mirror is concave or convex or plane, it does have a reflection. And that reflection of the original consciousness is what is seen. If the mirror is dirty, it gets even worse. So the reflecting media, the reflected consciousness, both are the upadhis. And that upadhi is superimposed on the original consciousness. And that's how we get stuck in the samsara. So the essence is, if this mind, the reflected consciousness and the reflecting media are taken away, what remains is just the thought of aham Brahma Asmi, which has to be understood. And then it is like a pole vault. Once we get that, you drop the mind and do away with the upadhis of the samsara.
Very nicely explained. Thank you, Dr. Ravi Shankar. But questions will be there. I'll one more question. I'm open to.
I have one more question, sir. Every day we get in the telegram a question. Each day we get a question. And we also get an answer the following day. Would you be able to put up such questions on Panchadashi itself? It makes us to go through and really contemplate. I must absolutely admire the inspiration that you inculcate in each one of us.
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, it is because of people like you, we are really motivated to do whatever is required, but we know we are doing it primarily for ourselves, and this is a byproduct. Neeta and myself, we will work on this. We will take this, we'll take all these Purva Pakshi's questions, bring in questions first and allow people to answer on the Telegram group. And then we will put the answers. See, these are not our answers, but what Swami Paramarthananda has given as answers. So we will certainly do that exercise. Shall we proceed?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Aksha, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Chakshurdipavapakshete gatade darshane yatha na deepa darshane kintu chakshurekam apekshyate. Here in this verse 93, when we want to see the pot, we need the eye. Here the eye is compared to the thought and Dipa to the Chidabhasa. Both are required because the pot is not self-luminous. On the other hand, Dipa Darshane, to see the light, we don't need any other torchlight. We need only the eye. As in the case of a Brahma, Jnana Vritti alone is enough. The next slide, sir. In verse 94, Swami Vidyaranya makes it very clear that Chidabhasa is formed or present even in the case of Brahma Jnana. Even though it does really exist, it is mixed with the light of Brahman. It is like the beam of moonlight. When it is directed to the sunlight, moonlight will join the sun, but it will not increase the intensity of the sunlight. Chidabhasa only merges into the Chit and will not add to the brightness of the original Chit. So when the Purva Pakshi asks, how do you know all this? Swami Vidyaranya says it is the Shastra Pramana. Swami Vidyaranya explains about the Aparoksha Jnanam in the verse 95. Aham Brahma Asmi rises in the mind of a Shishya when he does proper Mahavakya Vichara under a competent Guru. Swami Paramarthananda goes on to explain that self-knowledge is similar to any other knowledge, but it's not the same. Paramatma is involved in both. In both, mind is involved. A thought arises in the case of worldly knowledge in relation to the object of knowledge, and also in the spiritual knowledge, a thought arises. Here it is akhanda akara vritti. The thought alone removes the ignorance covering the object, and the function of the thought is ajnana nivritti. In the worldly knowledge, the thought removes vishaya avaraka ajnana. In the spiritual knowledge, it removes Brahma avaraka ajnana. There is no difference in both, whether it's the material knowledge or the Brahma jnana. In both, the reflected consciousness formation takes place. The only difference is in the case of worldly knowledge, the objects are inert and they cannot reveal themselves, and something is required to illumine them. And that is the reflected consciousness. Here, reflected consciousness has a role to play, and this is phala vyapti. In the spiritual knowledge, reflected consciousness has no role, because Brahman happens to be the original consciousness, and there's no need for RC to reveal the OC. The example that can be given is the moonlight does not or need not illumine the sunlight. So two statements are contradictory here. From vritti vyapti angle, mind is required, as the thought alone removes the ignorance. But from the standpoint of ignorance removal, mind is required. So from the standpoint of illumining the Brahman, mind is not required, as Brahman is self-effulgent. Like the way Apeksha explained it so clearly in verses 91 and 92. 96th verse is reiterating the first verse of Panchadashi, Atmanam Chet Vijaniyat. It is the Aparoksha Jnana, because in this knowledge, a person specifies Brahman not as a general object somewhere, but Jnani specifies Brahman as himself. That Jagat Karana Brahman as aham asmi. And this is the Aparoksha Jnana. Swami Vidyaranya concludes Mahavakya Vichara with this verse, which had started in verse number 70. Verse 97, he talks about the obstacles for this jnana, and this goes on till verse number 134. Astu bodo parokshotra mahavakya tatapyasau na drudaha shravanadinam acharyehi punariranat. Vedantic students ask how jnana gives samsara nivritti. There is some gap here between jnana prapti and jnana phala prapti. The mind creates certain obstacles, and that does not allow jnana to do its job. This is like when the light is burning, but still there is some darkness which does not go. Means that the light which is lit is covered by something. Such obstacles in the mind are called antakarana dosha. Obstacles are creation of our own mind, and knowledge is not allowed to do its job. This is called sapratibandha aparoksha jnana. The types of obstacles can be divided into three types. Pramana asambhavana. The second one is reservation regarding the nature of Brahman. And the third is viparita bhavana. The reservation, the first one, the pramana asambhavana, The reservation is regarding the essential teaching of Vedanta itself, as to whether Vedanta says you are Paramatma, or you are part of Paramatma, or you are a dasa of Paramatma. These reservations create a doubt, and repeated analysis of the teaching, it gets cleared. Upanishad does not have any intention other than saying that you are the truth of the world. And this is not production of knowledge, but removal of the first obstacle by analysis. The second one is regarding the reservation, regarding the nature of Brahman. Upanishad says, I am the non-dual Advaita Atma. But our sense organs report the plurality. While Vedanta says, I am non-dual, Pratyaksha Pramana says, I am a part of duality. So Shastra Pramana says, you are non-dual. This goes on. We cannot dismiss Pratyaksha Pramana easily, because that is the primary source of knowledge. Both are powerful sources of knowledge, both Pratyaksha and Shastra. Sense organs work in the Vyavaharik field, whereas Vedantic functions in the Paramarthik field. Vedanta does not say there is Advaita in Vyavaharik plane. Veda accepts Dvaita in the Vyavaharik plane. Pratyaksha cannot contradict Paramarthika, as it cannot function in that Paramarthik field. So when we say Advaita, it is at the Paramarthik level, and Pratyaksha is valid for the Vyavaharik plane. And the third obstacle is Viparita Bhavana, that is habitual non-Vedantic thinking. The conception of I in the mind is Sangha. I that is described in Vedanta is Asanga. The conventional I and the Vedantic I are different. We have to make the I, that is this, which has Sangha, feebler, and allow the other mind to dominate. Vedanta is meant to replace or weaken the ahankara and dominate the aham. And this Viparita Bhavana Nivritti is essential. Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam are meant for Pramana Asambhavana, Prameya Asambhavana, and Pratibandha Nivritti. And then Jnana becomes Jnana Nishta. If people come to Vedanta after sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, then the obstacles will not be there. It is like switching on the light and darkness disappears immediately. So once the obstacles go, then there is a conversion from sapratibandha jnana to apratibandha jnana. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raksha, for another wonderful presentation. You had two very key verses. The first was the same Vritti Vyapti Pala Vyapti with a nice pot and light example. And you made use of that to answer this particular question. Yat vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. Now, many times in scriptures, you will say that Brahman is something which the mind and the words cannot describe. So Shastra cannot talk about that. At the same time, Kathopanishad verses say it is only through the Shastras you will get to know the mind. And that you have explained very nicely through this technique of what is this tripti, vyapti, and pala vyapti. From then, we have gone to a new topic. What is the new topic? The new topic is about Astubodha. Now, here comes the Purva Pakshi and saying, okay, now you have got it. You have got Brahma Vidya, but what difference has it made to you? I'll give you an example. Laukika, a worldly example. Let's say one of us is working as a toll booth attendant, taking a nominal salary every month, working from morning to evening, struggling with all the people who don't want to pay toll and so on. And then he gets a lottery, 10,000 crores of rupees, $1 billion. Now, won't his life change drastically? Will he ever go back to the toll booth and continue to do what? Now his life would change. Now, not 10,000 crores. We have now inherited the whole world. In fact, the whole world is mithya. We have equated ourselves to Brahman. Now, this knowledge of Brahma, aham, Brahma Asmi, if it has entered into our head, it is mind shattering. Our mind would be really, it is atomic. We cannot be the same. Now, Astu Bodha, okay, now you have got this knowledge. What difference has it made? I'm still the same. Now, from now on to 130, and Padma will continue trying to explain. And the key verse Dr. Raksha was able to explain why I got this knowledge. I have got something more than 10,000 crores or billions, but still my life has not made a difference. Once I understand what are these pratibandhas, what are those obstacles, am I ready to work on them? You know, if you say Brahma Satyam, Aham Brahmasmi, very nice. Jagan Mithya, am I ready to give Mithyatvam status to my body, to my mind, to my family, to my possessions, to my profession? Think. That is the index of Vairagya. That is why Swamiji emphasizes again and again about port. The more we come into Brahma Vidya, a time comes now. Kim vichan kasya kamaya? Why do I have to struggle? And for whom and for what? That is what we are going to see in the next few verses. Padma, please.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Earlier we have seen a reflection on Mahavakya and self-realization. Now there's a change in topic. It's about abidance in knowledge using Shravanam, Mananam and Nididhyasana. In verse 98, which is Shankaracharya's Vakyavritri Shloka, and also Yagnavalakyas in Aranyakya Upanishad, explains to Maitreyi that even after deliberating on Mahavakya, I am Brahman, and attaining Aparoksha Jnanam, the knowledge is not firm in the mind. And by following external and internal prescribed disciplines, sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, this knowledge becomes one's true nature by following repeated Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Verse 99. Badam santi hyadyadiyasya hetavaha shrutya aneketa asambhavyatvam arthasya viparita cha bhavana. Translation. There are indeed many causes for the lack of firmness of this knowledge. The apparently contradictory statements in the scriptures, the doubt about the possibility and erroneous notions. In spite of scriptures and Guru's teachings, one is unable to come to aham Brahma Asmi due to lack of firmness of absorbing the Brahma Vidya. The lack of firmness is due to the obstacles created within the mind called antakarna dosha. And this knowledge, which does not work to give firmness, is called sapratibandha aparoksha jnanam. Next slide, sir. To cite an example, if there is darkness in the room, in spite of a lit lamp, it is because the lamp is enveloped by a covering. That is to say, knowledge is clouded with doubts and there is no clarity. There are many obstacles that make it impossible for firmness or instability that prevent the abidance of self-knowledge of Brahman. And the three main obstacles are, next slide please, Pramana Asambhavana, Shruti Anekta, which is confusion about what the scriptures teach because of the manifoldness or contradictory statements of scriptural interpretation or lack of faith in the scriptures or Guru or both. Again, because of different versions, sometimes quite contradictory. To quote a few examples, does Vedanta teach Dvaita or Advaita? Scholars have debated this for over 2000 years. Ramanuja and other Dvaita scholars have tremendously debated powerful arguments which go against Advaita Vedanta, while Shankaracharya propagates Advaita. And teachings of both Ramanuja and Shankaracharya are based on the same Upanishads. And some Vedic statements like, next slide please. Jivatma is one and the same as Paramatma, that is Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. The body of an individual has both Jivatma and Paramatma, indicating Jivatma and Paramatma are different. And in Bhagavad Gita it is said, Jivatma is Amsha of Ishvara. So the dilemma is, am I one with God? Am I different from God? Or am I part of God? This is Pramana Asambhavana. One is lost in the maze of the many voices of scriptural interpretations, confusion regarding the Upanishad's teachings, and difficulty in ascertaining the correct meaning. The next, Prameya Asambhavana. Here it is the confusion about the subject matter of the scriptures, which is Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara. Not clear about who am I. Impossible to accept I am Brahman and Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya. And third one, Viparita Bhavana. A feeling or notion which is contrary to reality is a literal meaning of Viparita Bhavana. To cite an example, we have seen sunrise and sunset, giving the notion that sun rises in the east and sets in the west, though in reality the sun is stationary and earth revolves around it. And another, we have body-mind complex. I possess the body, I'm not the body. I possess the mind, I'm not the mind. But a feeling which is contrary to reality. And Swami Paramarthanandaji says, even after Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam, our powerful tendencies formed over innumerable lifetimes don't allow us to come to terms with our real nature. Self-discovery takes place due to Shravanam. Vidyaranya Swami says, self-discovery takes place due to Mahavakya, and repeated Shravanam, Mananam are required for firmness of this knowledge. Verse 101, Vedantanam Asheshanam Adhi Madhya Vasantaha Brahmatmaneva Tatparyamat iti dihi Shravanam Bhavit. Translation, listening is developing an understanding that the main theme of the entire Vedantic texts from the beginning, middle, and to the end is the identity of Brahman, truth, the individual self. This verse speaks of the purpose of Shravanam. The ancient sages and rishis of yore wanted to convey through the Upanishads, Brahmatmaneva Tatparyam iti dihi. Shravanam is dihi, knowledge, the Tatparyam, the intended meaning of the Vedantic teachings of all Upanishads by gurus. The rishis wanted to convey the Tatparyam, intended meaning of the Upanishads in the beginning of the Upanishad, in the middle of the Upanishad, and to the end of the Upanishad. That is, throughout the whole scriptures. Only one thought sought to be established throughout. That is, Brahma Atmaneva, that Atma and Brahma are one and the same. This being the central message of the gurus to discover and ascertain the path is Shravanam. And lack of clarity about what scriptures teach. Mahavakya alone is recognized as the cause of knowledge. Shravanam can be defined as the Sadalinga Vichara, an inquiry, the sixfold process of arriving at oneness of consciousness, that is through Sadalinga Dwara. First one, Upakarma, Upasamhara, what the Upanishads say in the beginning and at the end, that is throughout the Upanishad. Second one, Abhyasa, repetition of oneness of Brahma, Tattvam Asi. Third, Apurvata, that is the uniqueness of knowledge, is that the knowledge of Brahman is knowable only through the Upanishads or the Vedas alone. The fourth, Arthavada, establishment of greatness of Brahma Jnana. Fifth one, Phalam, attainment of Brahma Jnanam, that is moksha. Adi Shankaracharya says, Jnanam eva mokshaha. Moksha is nothing but gaining knowledge. Upapati, logic used to establishing oneness of Atma or Brahman. Logic like ocean and the waves, the clay and the pot, etc. Repeated Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam is required to fill or clear the gap between Jnana Prapti, that is Tattvam Asi, to come to Aham Brahma Asmi. Hari Om. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Padma, for a nice explanation of these two verses. As we have run out of time, I will not have any time for discussion. except to say this much, that we have got Brahma Vidya. We have got the greatest treasure ever. But remember, it is sa pratibandha. It is along with various obstacles. There are at least 3 obstacles. Vidyaranya Swami clearly will, in the next 30 verses that we will study, will tell us how we can work on these removal of these obstacles. And hopefully, by some time, we will be able to claim aham Brahma Asmi. Apeksha, please.
Hari Om, sir. So today I present my favorite verse in Gita, and we'll talk about this verse, why this is my favorite, and I'll relate with it some personal examples also, and personal things which I feel are very important in our day-to-day life. So let me just narrate this verse. Kayan manasa buddhaya kevalari indriya api yoginah karmah kurvanti sangha tyaktava atma shuddhaye. So we have always heard, right, that whatever we are doing, whatever we are receiving in life, we should just take it as a prasad. We should accept it as a prasadam of God. But one question that has always come in mind: how do you accept it as a prasad? Because when things are going good, it's easy to accept that as a prasad. But when things are not going good, it's not easy to accept that as a prasad. And the reason for that is because we are all attached to our sense organs and our body. And I feel this shloka actually leads to, this shloka helps you, if you start implementing this shloka in your life, what I have experienced is that you actually move towards mental purification, the chitta shuddhification, the chitta shuddhi happens. And what does that mean, mental purification? See, if you want to grow a plant on any land, the field has to be fertile, right? Your mind has to be fertile. And if your mind is not fertile, you will not be able to grow up. The land is not fertile, you will never be able to grow a plant. So here the plant is that of aham brahmasmi, like sir said, right? So for that knowledge to see, to seep in our being, our mind should be pure, our chitta should be pure. And this shloka helps you in day-to-day life. And that's what I feel. So, karma yoga, when we talk about, we all know Gita talks about being a karma yogi, and we all are karma yogis in every day-to-day minute of our life. We are doing some, karma in our life. So karma yoga can happen through 4 ways. One is, kayana, that is, through physical action. Kaikam, that is the physical action. Manasa, which is your words, like through japa that you do, or the words that you speak. Then vachaka. Manasa is the meditation or upasana that we do. That is the 3rd level. And the 4th level is the buddhya level, that is the intellect level through which we try to understand Gita. So let me first talk about this shloka. This shloka says, what karma yogi has to keep in mind. Karma yogi continuously has to keep this thought in the mind that this body, this mind, the intellect, all the sense organ, whatever that has been given to us, these are all property of Ishvara, given to us by Ishvara. It does not belong to us. This minus that we have, it does not belong to us. So without identification and without attachment to this body, to the senses, to the organs, to the intellect, if we do our karma yogas, then you start seeing the result to it. So whatever work is done is for the benefit of Ishvara and not for the ego. We have all seen, right, how ego comes. Ego comes in our mind, right? For example, if you are a CEO of a company, or if you are, running a family, if the, moms are watching, if you are doing anything, what if you start to work on your own personal interest, right? Then things start to go down, right? I have also experienced this. Whenever you start to think, for example, you are a mom and you are doing something for the family, for your children, for your husband, and you start having this expectation that I have done this for them, they should return back to it. Then there's always a downslide. I'm also an entrepreneur, and I have realized that there has been ups and downs in my life, in that journey of my entrepreneurship. Lot of ups, lot of downs also. And during that time, all that one thought that has helped me is that I'm just an instrument of God. And whatever is the right action, please, whenever I meditate or whenever I'm sitting with myself, I just, in my manasa, I always say, I'm just an instrument. Whatever is the right action should come through me. I am ready as an instrument. of God, and whatever result will be given to me, whether it's success in my venture or whether it is failure in my venture, be it my professional venture, be it my personal venture, I'll accept it with grace without identification that Apeksha is doing this. So this has really helped me traverse the ups and downs in my professional as well as personal life. Karma Yogi, it treats the body, mind, intellect, and senses as instruments of Ishvara. So my thought is I'm just an instrument. So the right action will happen. The success is not mine. The failure is not mine. If the success has come, you have to accept it with the humility that it is all by grace of God or Ishvara that it has come. And if a failure has come, you have to accept it with grace, that the life, the consciousness, the Ishvara wants to teach you something. And something best is going to happen. So this is also a prasad that has come to you. So accept it with grace and humility. So all the actions and their results, whether it's a success or a failure, it gets offered to Ishvara. So you never feel, you never feel dejected. You never feel elated. You're always like this. So even when there's this up in my life, whether it's professional or personal, I'm still here, and whether there's down also, it's still here because everything gets offered to Ishvara only. So what happens when a karma yogi, we continue to dedicate actions to Ishvara, mental purity happens. Our mind gets cleared of all the selfish desire. We don't expect anything from others. We don't expect anything for ourselves also. When the mind is purified of all the vasanas that has come through us from previous births, from this birth, through the karma yogas we have done, which is meant by self in the shlok, it gets purified. And purification of mind, I feel, is the most important thing if we want to attain, if we want to seep in the being, if we want to see the real self, that is the pure, blissful self of our aham Brahma Asmi. So that fertile land has to be there. And that's why this is my favorite verse. And I'll just end this with the three things that has really helped me personally. Thanks to this shloka, whenever I do any action, I always say this too, whether it is through Vachika, whether it's through Vachikam or through Kaikam or Manasa or Buddhya, always tell yourself three things which I heard. I want nothing, I am nothing, I do nothing. So even if you are doing any action physically, you are doing any japa, you are doing any meditation, if these three things you tell yourself, or you're reading Gita, I want nothing from this, I am nothing, I do nothing, then no ego can come to you. And then that is when the fertile land, that is when you start seeing the results of everything that we are learning. Through all these scriptures and through all these sessions, I feel that is when your mind becomes fertile to seep in the learnings and realize your true self, which is always blissful. And you understand aham Brahma Asmi even more deeper. There's still a long way to go, but I feel this shloka, helps you go through your karma yoga. So in your thoughts, words, and deeds, if you can be sensitive, what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you are doing, and you follow these three principles. I want nothing, I do nothing, I'm nothing, I'm just an instrument of Ishvara. Whatever comes to me, I offer it to Ishvara, whether good or bad. It is all Ishvara. So then, life becomes very simple and you have an equanimous mind, which then takes you to the next level of getting the knowledge from the right guru and taking you towards your goal. Hari Om, sir.
Thank you, Apeksha. As you run out of time, Neeta, can you conclude today's class?
Thank you, Dr. Hegde, and thank you to all the speakers. Our salutations to Swami Vidyaranya and our own Swamiji, Swami Paramatmanandaji. How can we know Brahman, who is free of all attributes? Vidyaranya points out that the very absence of the features is also a way of knowing. The realization of my true nature, the self-evident, the ever-evident self, takes place with a special Shabda Pramanam called Mahavakya. That is taken in by a special thought in the mind with the help of a guru, called Akhanda Atma Akara Vritti. Reflected consciousness plays no role and needs to not play a role to eliminate the self-eliminating self. The technicality of how we get this knowledge is given in these verses, 81 to 101. suggest listen to Swami Param audios. And it's only 5 audios. 5 hours is what it'll take. By Saturday, if you can do it, you will take a big leap. I can assure you that in your learning and your assimilation of this knowledge. Dr. Raksha also spoke about how the knowledge is not doing its job. We have the jnanam, but we don't see its fruits. There are obstacles which are divided into 3 types. Vidyaranya will speak in detail about the 3 obstacles, that our vasanas, our habitual non-Vedantic way of thinking, come in the way of being established in this knowledge we have received, and how we can overcome it surely, slowly but surely. This will be taken up next week. We will revisit these verses again on Saturday for clarity and Dhrida Nishchaya. This satsang will be premiered on this coming Friday, 28th July, for you to go through again. We will meet on 29th, this Saturday, 29th July at 6 p.m. for the recording of these same verses. These are all being done again and again for our own benefit, so that we, really take in what is being told. Hari Om. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purna Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Hari Om. Thank you, sir.